Scrappers, Tom here from the iScrap app. I want to talk about something that a lot of people have really mentioned over the last 16 months, and that's the scrap metal that's been created in Ukraine as a result of the war. So, I don't like talking about a lot of these things because it is a negative topic, but it is related to scrap metal. And I want to tell you what I've learned in the last few months about what's going on in Ukraine and how the scrap kind of is being handled. Now, one would think that when you have hundreds of damaged tanks, ammunitions in the millions piling up, buildings that have steel because they're collapsing, cars blowing up, etc. Nothing good, right? But let's just focus on the scrap metal. What's being done with it? Now, Ukraine is in such a funny position that they're more focused on fighting than they are building. So their own internal scrapping, which every country has dramatically decreased. And while many people think that the amount of military equipment that's being blown up and destroyed would make for really good scrap, there's a lot of big problems that come with it. And here's some of the things that I've read about. Let's take a tank, for example, right? Let's say an Abrams tank is blown up and it's sitting there for scrap. You got 50 tons of steel in one spot. Wow, what a great pile of scrap. No, not a great pile of scrap. The problem with military scrap is how it's made and what it's going to be reused for. When you're dealing with a tank, right, what is that? It's a big cannon, essentially, which means that it was probably actively shooting out, large rounds, whether it's from the guns on top or the large barrel itself. But there's gunpowder residue throughout those tanks. Many of the tanks get blown up, and there are still live ammunitions in the tanks. Just because the tank blew up doesn't mean that every single bullet or shell blew up as well. So let's say that you saw a tank and you wanted to take a torch and start cutting it up. You're not going to easily be able to do it because once you put that lighter on the torch and the fire starts burning, you yourself are at risk at yourself blowing up or gunpowder getting lit on fire. And those are things that are going to really be bad. On top of that, Ukraine is not building right now. Think about it. Their manufacturing industries are down. Their new construction is down. Their medical equipment being built is down because they're relying on the United States, European countries, and others to provide them with equipment because they don't have time or manpower to go back into the steel mills and start reusing their recycled material. So it's just sitting there piled up. Until the war is settled and a peace agreement is put into place, these broken buildings, blown up cars, destroyed tanks, etc., are going to sit there collecting dust, weeds, and not being recycled. And this is the absolute worst way for anything to be recycled. I would compare it to 9/11 when you had two buildings full of steel that had to be recycled, the worst type of scrap, right? Because this scrap now is designated negatively. So many people think that Ukraine is out there actively collecting scrap and sending it out to countries like Turkey or India, but Ukraine is more focused on defending their country than they are collecting scrap. But they do have two different designated groups that are out there picking up the scrap and recycling it the best they can, but it's not in the mass quantities that many people would think. And I read a few articles talking about how much of the scrap used to stay in Ukraine, and it generally was 20 to 40% of their recycled materials stayed inside of the country for industrial reuse. Well, currently that number is down to 5 to 10%, and because so many of their men that were working in the factories and women that were working in the factories are not working in those factories but are defending their country, that recycled material continues to pile itself up. And don't forget, millions of people have also moved out of the country because of the war that's going on. So while this is a really negative topic, there hasn't been a lot of good news because when you have military-grade scrap, it's generally made stronger than heavier commercial or residential scrap. It is now laced with gunpowder and potential explosives, and their energy is better spent defending than recycling and scrapping right now. So I've seen some comments, wow, Ukraine must have so much scrap. And while it's true, it comes with a heavy heart and it comes with a heavier problem to solve. And it doesn't look like there's going to be one anytime soon to solve that issue. And moving into 2023 and 2024, depending on what happens, you're just going to continue to have these things pile up. And until there's a resolution and a plan for rebuild, the scrap, even as it starts to get recycled, is going to take such a long time to come back into rebuilding Ukraine, Crimea, parts of Russia that have had big problems, that the scrap metal side of the war is insignificant currently. And even when it does become essential or significant, it's not going to be as easy as many people would think. And it's not going to have a real impact on the global demand for scrap that many people would think. It was like the infrastructure bill in the United States that was passed in 2022. People thought the demand for steel was just going to go through the roof. And that's not the case, because infrastructure can be fiber optic for internet, charging stations using copper for electric vehicles, solar panels using aluminum and copper, not heavy uses of steel. The steel industry is really contingent on heavy industrial growth, not residential, right? Industrial, heavy commercial growth. And until the war in Ukraine really stops and the dust settles and people can take a step back, the scrap story is not going to be one that's very interesting moving forward. But when they do get to that point, we'll update you. But just know it's going to be a very hard obstacle to tackle. So hopefully this gives many of you a different perspective on the scrap that's being produced in Ukraine. And if you have any questions or comments, comment below. Until next time, I'll scrap you later.
Thanks for checking out this scrap video. For more exclusive scrap video content, please become a YouTube member of our channel today. Thank you, and I'll scrap you later.